O Heavenly King, Comforter of the Spirit of truth, Lord everywhere present and fills all things, treasure of blessings and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every impurity, and save our souls as we go. Okay, we already had one class in this series already, and it's on YouTube for everyone to peruse. And I discovered after I'd already printed part of a number of these things that there's a mistake. And the mistake is where it says Books of the Church, Horologion, 12 volumes.
Minean.
It should be Minean. It's 12
It is
volumes.
Minean.
Right, that's the corrected version.
Okay.
On the rest of them, it should say Minean above the 12 volumes. And so, essentially what we talked about in the last, in the first class, was that Orthodoxy and the liturgical services form a whole way of life. And it forms a whole order of prayer, a whole rule of prayer, that is what structures life for Orthodox Christians, especially in monasteries, but also because it's done to its fullness in the monasteries, simply because it was developed in a monastery. For the most part, it was developed at the monastery of St. Savas on the road from Jerusalem to Jericho in the 7th or 8th century, when it pretty much came to its final form. The book that regulates it is called the Typicon, which is the book that it tells you how to do all the services for any given day of the year, and given a whole set of variables. And what we'll do is talk about the variables. But the Typicon is also broader because it's the monastic rule. So it talks about how do you elect an abbot, what are the various offices in the monastery, what are the rules of feasting and fasting, and all these other things that are a fundamental part of the rule. And I think you've all heard that in Islam there's a debate, between Sunni and Shia. One prays 7 times a day, one prays 5 times a day. Well, Christians pray 8 times a day, according to this rule. It's the book of the Horologion, which is this. Which is the daily rule of prayer. The daily rule. It's the basis of the daily rule, to which all sorts of other texts are added. So what initially we need to talk about, before we start going through the various services and is to know what the various sources are that the services are composed of. The Horologion draws its basis from, as I said, from the monastic rule of St. Savas. There's also influence from the monastery of the Studion in Constantinople. And it's a little bit different in its form than, say, how things developed in Egypt. the great centers of Christianity, of course, were Antioch, where the where the disciples were first called Christians, and where the apostles first went to Damascus and then to Antioch, which was the capital of that region called the Diocese of the East of the Roman Empire. Then also very early Christians went to Egypt and Alexandria, and the Egyptian culture became very prominent. Then Rome, then eventually Jerusalem, and so forth. Jerusalem, with the 4th century, and the finding of the sacred sites, the cross, the tomb of Christ by St. Helen, became a major pilgrimage site, and thus became also a major source for the liturgy of the church that became a model that was used in many other places. The other major source was really most important source was Constantinople, and while the services in Hagia Sophia, which existed from the 6th century, and something before it even, long before, were so complex that they could not be replicated almost anywhere else, with one exception. It was not the services of the great church that were the model for the liturgical life of the church, but rather the monastery of the Studion. Now, it's very important to understand that there is no different typicon for parishes as there is for monasteries. There's no difference. It's the same typicon. Obviously, in parishes they don't elect abbots and things like that. But the liturgical cycle is absolutely identical. There's no differences between services in a monastery and a parish.
I'm sorry, can we ask questions and engage? Or
yeah.
Okay. Get back to the typicon. Define that one more time for me, please.
The typicon means the rule.
The rule.
The rule.
Okay. And it was written by...
It's a compilation over over several centuries, but finished by around the 7th, 8th century. And the one that finally took precedence is the Typicon of St. Sabas in Jerusalem. There's another Typicon that had a lot of influence, and that was the Typicon of the Studion in Constantinople.
Okay, I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah. I write slowly and I'm trying to make sure.
Oh, no problem. Is it clear so far? Okay. The Typicon lays out how to do all the services. The basis for the services, the first and most important basis, is for the daily cycle of services, and that's in the Horologion. There's a daily cycle, there's a weekly cycle, which is, you find in the Octoikos, it's an 8-week cycle of the 8 tones, or structured by 8 sets of melodies and texts pertinent to those particular melodies that are inserted into Matins, Vespers, and Compline, that talk about the particular themes that are designated for each day of the week. You have that on this sheet. Sunday is the resurrection, Monday is the angels, Tuesday is John the Baptist, Wednesday is the cross and Theotokos, Thursday is the apostles and St. Nicholas, Friday is also the cross and Theotokos, and Saturday is martyrs and the departed. And so the stichira, or the verses that are sung on the Psalms, come from the book of the Octoikos. And again, it has, and we'll go into where they fit and how they fit in. One of the Then on top of the weekly cycle, there's the annual cycle, and that's there are different saints and feast days and commemorations for every day of the year. Often there are multiple commemorations for every day of the year. In English, we have the Menaion, in other words, this book of the 12 months of the year, or books in only 12 volumes. In Russia, it's about 40 volumes, 40 thick volumes, and because it has multiple services for every day of the year, depending on what saint you want to commemorate. The Menaion has there's a book in English called the Festal Menaion, and that's just excerpts from the book of the Menaion. Thank you. They excerpt the 12 great feasts and some of the material from before and after. But it's definitely it's just a set of excerpts. Now there's another cycle that is so you have the daily, the weekly, the annual cycle. Then you have another cycle, is the Paschal cycle, and that means not just the Paschal cycle, or not just Pascha itself, but Lent before that, pre-Lent before that, and then you have the Bright Week. You have Pascha itself. Then you have after Bright Week you have the weeks of Pentecost, which are numbered all the way through until the beginning of Lent again. After the 50 days of Pentecost, you have the Feast of Pentecost, and then All Saints, and then, or rather Holy Spirit Day, and then the following weekend is All Saints. So this takes up about a third of the liturgical year, usually from February through May, if not more. And the structure of the services change, the content of the services change. You lay aside the Octoikos, and the books that structure it are the Lenten Triodion and the Pentecostarion. Now, in Russian, the Pentecostarion is called the Flowery Triodion. But in Greek, the Pentecostarion, the services of Pentecost. Of course, for Pascha itself, the services are absolutely unique. In fact, not even is there no Octoikos, there's no Menaion. Actually, in the service of Pascha, there's barely even the Horologion. And the services of Pascha itself, even this gets laid aside to a great extent. There's a kind of vague structure there of the services, but they don't follow, like, for example, you don't read a whole lot of Psalms during Bright Week, right? There's some basic structural material, but for the most part, they're gone. So, now there's connected to the Paschal cycle is the cycle of readings of the Old Testament, of the epistles of St. Paul, or the epistles of the apostles, and the Gospels. Now, the Gospels and the epistles are two separate books. And actually, there is a book, and there is a new edition of it in English, thanks to Peter Gardner, of a book called the Horologion, which has the readings from the Old Testament for all the different feast days of the year, including, I believe he put Lent in there, didn't he? Do you remember? I don't remember. There's a gospel and epistle designated for all the weekdays, for all the days of the year except the weekdays of Great Lent, and when the readings are from the Old Testament. So that in itself, it's not really a separate official separate book, but there is a readings from the Old Testament. So you could also just add to this list just the Bible, Old and New Testaments, with the so-called Apocrypha. We don't consider it to be the Apocrypha. Now the cycles of Gospels and Epistles actually starts on Pascha. The cycle of the Manaean starts on September 1st, Church New Year. The cycle of the Octoikos starts with Pentecost. So you have all of these cycles beginning and interlocking. It's like a whole bunch of wheels in a clock, and it's all governed by the calendar, which prescribes, which of course, so that you know what the date is. Therefore, you know the Manaean. You can determine how far it is from Pentecost, so you know the week of Pentecost. So if you know the week of Pentecost and the day of the week, you can figure out what the reading is going to be. Say it's Tuesday of the 14th week after Pentecost. Well, you go to this section for Tuesday of the 14th week after Pentecost, and it's all written out there. And in properly done Orthodox liturgical books, and the Gospels and the Epistles are Orthodox liturgical books. Other people use them, and we let them use them, but they're our books. And it's all written out there according to this cycle of readings. Now there's another book which is critical, and that's the Psalter. Initially, the Church's rule of prayer started out in the Egyptian desert and in the deserts of Palestine and Syria, for those who could read, with monks reading and memorizing the whole Psalter. And they would start at the beginning and recite the whole thing through until the end. In Egypt, once a day. Other traditions have developed other kinds of rules for reading the Psalter. For example, our tradition, just for a shorthand, our tradition is the Greek Orthodox tradition, right? Even in Russia, the church is technically called the Greek Orthodox Church. So, in the Greek Orthodox tradition, there are two parallel ways that the Psalter is used. One is in the Horologion, where there are selected psalms by theme that are put together as parts of the service. So, in Matins, for example, you have two psalms at the royal psalms at the beginning, talking about the king, and there's the commemoration of the king, at least as it used to be, as the services were originally done, while there were such things as Orthodox kings. Then you have the 6 psalms. Then you have selected verses from the Psalms. God is the Lord and has appeared unto us. Bo Gospodi Yavisena. That's just selected verses out of, I don't remember which psalm. Then you have a little bit later Psalm 50. I'm using the Greek Septuagint number. Then you have a little bit later the Magnificat. My soul doth magnify the Lord. Now, along with the 151 psalms that are present in the Greek in the Septuagint, which is the Orthodox, which is the version of the Old Testament scriptures that the Orthodox Church uses. The Orthodox Church does not use the Masoretic text, which is what Protestant Bibles are composed of, because it was too much was edited out of it by the Jews and then by the Protestants. So we go with the oldest translation of the scriptures into Greek that exists, and that's from the 3rd century BC, the Septuagint version, which was translated by 70 translators. That's where you get the word Septuagint, which means the 70, which contains 151 psalms, and it also contains 9 scriptural odes. In other words, songs taken from the Old and also the New Testament. The first 8 are from the Old Testament, and then the 9th is a compilation between the Song of Mary and the Song of Zacharias, the father of John the Baptist. These 9 odes, scriptural odes, became the foundation of matins, of the morning service. And they're used, or they were used, in full during the matin service. And when we talk about matins, I'll tell you about them. In the Western Church, they have a whole different system of using the psalms, the ode, and the odes. So I'm talking about the Greek Orthodox tradition, and how we use them. In the Roman Catholic Book of Hours, or which is also called a breviary, the services are similar to ours, except many things are transposed between matins and vespers, between morning and evening. In the Coptic Church, they still just use the Psalter, but they have a kind of funny usage, because if there are 5 or 10 monks in the monastery, they'll each take one part of it, and sitting all together, they'll say their part of it, divided into equal shares. So you have this total cacophony going on of 10 monks reading 10 different things, 10 different sets of psalms, like 10 different cathisms.
Same time?
All at the same time. We don't do that, thank God. But everybody's been present for the whole thing, so they kind of get away with it. It is kind of funny, actually. So one of the things that's interesting, I was talking about the odes. You have this book, the Lenten Triodion, the book of 3 odes, Triodion. There are 3 songs. And in the normal Horologion for matins, in the normal rule for matins outside of Lent, you have, does anybody know how many odes are used outside of Lent? 9.
Well,
8.
Yeah, the second is not.
The second is omitted. Except when?
Oh, good question. During Great Lent?
On Tuesdays of Great Lent. They'll do number 2. Otherwise, it's omitted. How many odes are used in the Triodian period?
Usually 3, right?
3.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting that the services are shorter during Great Lent than they are during the regular part of the year. So, but it's all that's how it all kind of comes together. It's all regulated by the calendar. But what there is in this is that there's a tremendous variation in the liturgical life of the church. In fact, to go through all of the entire cycle, it takes before you start repeating a year. It's 72 years to go through one full cycle. So it's a whole lifetime. Whole lifetime, and so that's talk about complex and how it all fits together. Whereas in other usage, you just repeat the whole thing once a year or once every couple or 3 years. I know there's a different usage for the Syriac churches, but I don't know what it is. So now does this make sense, kind of, where we are so far? Okay. Now, the content of the daily cycle. It's important to understand that for the Byzantines, when this was put together, the day started at evening, just like the Jews. The day starts at sunset, and it goes through to the following sunset. So, if you go to Athonite usage, sunset is 12 o'clock. So, everything is reversed. It's off by like 6 hours, and they actually change their clocks every day to reflect the time of sunrise and sunset. We don't do that regularly. But the day starts with Vespers. There are 2 major services, what we would call liturgical services of the day, because they actually would take place in the temple itself. Remember, in a properly structured temple, you have the narthex, nave, and the holy place. Or the altar, there's various ways of. For the liturgical services, they take place in the nave and use the altar. For the non-liturgical services, they're read in the narthex, according to the Typicon. Now, we don't do this in parishes. Usually, like here, there is no narthex. there's a kind of symbolic narthex. But for example, the community, the whole monastic community, would gather in the narthex for the 9th hour, and then go into the nave for Vespers. You know how here we, during a liturgy, on a feast day where there's the blessing of the 5 loaves, we go to the back of the church. Well, historically, we would either go out in procession around the church, like we do sometimes, or instead of just going to the back doors of the church, we would be going into the narthex, and everybody would follow into the narthex, and then the doors to the nave would be closed. And the liturgy, the Great Intercession, you follow me? You know what I'm talking about? It's where the deacon, we go to the back of the church during Vespers, and they're singing hymns, and the chief priest is standing back here in the middle, and the other priests are lined up, and then the deacon says this long litany of saints. O Lord, save thy people and bless thine inheritance. Whatever the text is. And then 5 different times, and they sing, Lord have mercy, 40 times in each one. Or what? Anyway, that's that happens out here. Here again, monastic usage still preserves this, and this is and remember, what we're dealing with is an ancient monastic typicon, designed to structure the services in the monastery of St. Savas 1300 years ago. And it hasn't changed since, for the most part. So, remember how at Vespers there's an entrance into the altar? The priest comes out, there's a blessing of the entrance, and then they sing "O Gladsome Light," right? Okay. What's happening at that time? It's the time of lighting of the lamps. So in some places what they'll do at that point is that up until that point in Vespers, there are no candles on. There are no candles lit, no electric lights, there's no nothing. And then at Gladsome Light, they bring out the light, the candle with the lit candle, and somebody gets the light from the candle and starts lighting all the lamps around the church as they sing, "O gladsome light of the holy glory of the immortal heavenly Holy Father, blessed Jesus Christ." Now that we've come to the setting of the sun, okay, that's a kind of key phrase. Now that we've come to the setting of the sun, and behold the light of evening, we sing thy praises, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, God. So Vespers marks the setting of the sun. It marks the coming of evening. And what this whole cycle is about is the sanctification of time. It sanctifies each particular kind of part of the day. And so, starting at Vespers, you sanctify the evening. And with Matins, with Matins you have the key moment. Matins is the morning service, Matin le matin in French. The key part of that is glory to thee who has shown us the light. Glory to God in the highest, in the great doxology. That essentially liturgically marks the rising of the sun. And so that gives you an idea of when these services are supposed to start. Vespers, 15-20 minutes before sunset. Matins, a couple of hours before sunrise. So, it's they're tied to the various parts of the day. Now, there's another service that we have that I think everybody would be more familiar with than having Vespers and Matins and all these hours and all this stuff interspersed throughout the day, is on Saturday nights we do a vigil, right? Mm-hmm. What is a vigil? It's Vespers and Matins put together, and then they tack on the first hour at the end. So a vigil, in the original form of the vigil, when did it begin? 15 minutes before sunset. And when did it end? 15 minutes after sunrise. And there are still places in the world, in some monasteries, where a typical Saturday night vigil, well, actually not 15 minutes before sunrise, because it's actually about a half hour worth of prayers to end matins and do the hours, and then you do liturgy at the end of a real vigil. So it goes from about if it were September, if it was the equinox, it would go from 6 o'clock in the evening to 8 o'clock in the morning. If you go to Mount Athos, you can do that. Now, in the normal monastic practice, these services are done at the hours that are more or less prescribed. So Vespers is done around sunset. Compline is in Greek it's called apodiknon, or in Russian povecheria, which means the after dinner service. And it's what the monks do after dinner. It's the service they do to sanctify the evening and before they go to bed. So you have, in monastic usage, you would have Vespers, you would have dinner, and then you would have Compline. And so that's the beginning of the new day. And then at 3 o'clock in the morning, or thereabouts, or 4, there's the midnight office. Well, one of the marks of the midnight office is Psalm 118, which is the longest psalm in the book of Psalms. It's 176 verses. And it takes about 25 minutes to read quickly. But that's also a kathisma. The kathismas are the way the Psalter was divided up to be used liturgically in Matins and Vespers, so that the cycle would produce reading through the entire Psalter once a week. We all know how at Vigil we sing, "Blessed is the man," right? Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, hallelujah, you know. Is that familiar to everybody? Okay. Those 4 or 6 verses, or whatever they are actually just selected verses from the first stasis, each of the first kathisma of the Psalter. The Psalter is divided into 20 parts called kathismata, which means time to sit down. Means time to sit. Each kathisma is divided into 3 parts, or stases. So, which is, and they vary in length more or less, but they tried to make them all more or less equal. Each stasis has between 1 and 3 or 4 psalms. And you figure there are 60 stases for the 150 psalms, 151 psalms. We don't read 151, but it's there. So the idea is, instead of going through the whole Psalter daily, you have these psalms that form the structure of these services, together with the continual reading of the Psalter, so that you get through the Psalter once a week. But the structural psalms are the kind of thing that you get to know by memory, and it's much easier because you're hearing them all the time. This is when you're in a monastery and you have the services going every day, and you're doing all the full services. Not all monasteries do all the services in full. It's too much to go through the full cycle of daily cycle, this is just the base of the daily cycle, is between 8 and 10 hours a day, depending on how fast you sing.
And does someone keep vigil every night? Or?
No, the vigils are prescribed for the big feasts.
Okay.
Sundays and the big feasts.
Okay.
Now,
For 72 years.
yeah.
Okay.
That doesn't mean that once you're 72 that you can quit going to church.
Okay.
I remember that from last week.
Okay? So, let's get to this. Midnight office, I think Psalm 118. Then matins is supposed to start a couple hours before sunrise, in the deep dark. And so you think about it, what do we do in the vigil service, which has matins in it, when we read the 6 Psalms? Turn off all the lights, right? And that's a kind of emulation, even if it's 4:30 in the afternoon. That's a kind of emulation of this sense that it's actually 4:30 in the morning. So by doing this Russian vigil thing, this contraction of the services together, we kind of anticipate the time and sanctify that. But in normal practice, according to the Typicon, Matin starts early, well before sunrise, and it's fairly long. Here again, it's a liturgical service. It takes place in the nave and in the altar, not in the narthex. It starts out with the 6 Psalms. Then God is the great litany. God is the Lord, which are selected verses and in a responsory kind of thing. God is the Lord and has revealed himself to us. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, is the refrain. Okay? Then the verses start, oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Then the choir sings, God is the Lord and has appeared unto us. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Then the deacon says, I shall not die but live and tell of the works of the Lord. And so forth. There's 4 of those. And then it goes into the thematic hymns of the day, which is the Troparium, and works its way through. There's this readings from the Psalter, Psalm 50, and then the odes, ending up with the last set of psalms, which are 143, 144, 147, 148, 148, 149, and 150. The last 3 psalms, which are called the praises, or in Latin, that's what the lauds are. Lauds and praises are the same thing. Lauds is Latin. Which leads into the great doxology. Then there's more litanies, and then that's matins. Matins is designed to last between 2 and 3 hours. Obviously, you're not going to get a whole lot else done if you're going through the full daily cycle of services. If you're in there 8 hours praying for 8 hours a day, that's a fantastic thing. But Not many places can pull that off. Then there are 4 little services. First hour, third hour, sixth hour, ninth hour. So this should be around 5:30 p.m. Compline is around 8 p.m. Midnight office is 3 a.m. This is about 4 a.m. First hour is 6 a.m. Third is 9 a.m. Sixth is noon. And ninth is 3 p.m. Then it starts all over again. The hours consist basically of 3 psalms, 3 selected psalms, some troparion, some thematic hymns of the day. During Lent, they use the thematic hymns or troparia that mark the time itself. O Lord, who at the 3rd hour descended in the Holy Spirit upon thine apostles, take him not from us, O good one, but renew him in us who pray unto thee. O thou who at the 6th hour, 9th hour, what is it? I don't remember offhand. There's also other material in here. 6th hour is, thou who on the 6th day and in the 6th hour is nailed to the cross, Adam's daring sin in paradise, tear asunder also the handwriting of our sins, O Christ God, and save us. Then there's the 9th hour. And this, I think, will probably be a little more familiar because you still hear it during Great Lent and Pre-Sanctified. O thou who at the 9th hour for our sake didst taste of death in the flesh, mortify our carnal mind, O Christ God, and save us. And when the 9th hour is read before Pre-Sanctified liturgy, that's these troparion of the hour are read, and they make prostrations and things like that. Do you remember that? Okay. If you look at the Psalms that are connected with the hours, one of them mentions specifically that time of day. Here again, it's a way of marking and sanctifying the time. The hours take about 10 minutes to read. And it's very short. Now, in normal practice, there are a few places that would do the services at the appointed times. However, in most monasteries, you do 9th hour and Vespers, 5:30, Compline at 8 p.m. Have midnight office, matins, and the 1st hour, probably around 4:30. I think at Jordanville they do it at 4:30. 3rd and 6th hour might be done at noon, and then 9th hour back to 5:30 p.m. Sometimes these would all be done together, and the liturgy would be celebrated. Now you notice the liturgy is not part of the daily cycle, because the liturgy floats. There are times when it's done at Vespers, right? 4 times during the year. And there are times, most of the time it's done after the 6th hour in Matins. The general rule is that liturgy is never done after noon, except when it's connected to a Vesperal liturgy. In Russian usage, they still kept the rule and just did Vespers at 9 o'clock in the morning. Which doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it's what we do in Holy Week. You know, now that we've come to the rising of the sun and behold the light of evening, you know, it doesn't quite fit, but we make the excuse that, well, we're anticipating it. We're anticipating the service. So is this clear? Okay, now we're going to go through each one of these services, by the way. In typical parish practice, we do, and for example, what we do here, we have a much abbreviated vigil. It's certainly not 14 hours long. It's about 2.5. Some places abbreviate it even more. And some places do it a little more full. But there are at least 5 different levels of how you do the service, as to complexity and to, shall we say, solemnity, depending on the rank of the feast, depending on the how important the saint is in the general usage, and or how these various things come together. Plus, there are at least 2 or 3 different ways of doing the services during Lent. So you're talking about 7 or 8 different ways of doing Matins and Vespers. With the hours, there's basically 2 different ways, Lenten and non-Lenten. But with the other services, you have different things. For example, I mentioned Litia during Vigil, right? It's when the blessing of the 5 loaves come out. There's all this long litany of saints, and then there's prayers for the bishops and prayers for the civil authorities, that we may be delivered from wrath, enmity, and all of those kinds of things, and where they sing "Lord have mercy" many times. It's the liturgy, and then the bread and the wine are blessed. That's only done on high-ranking feasts, and that's a mark of a very high-ranking feast. Certain times during the year, there are 2 psalms that are added to Matins, or that are sung during Matins. Usually 134 and 135, called the Paliale. And the reason it's called the Paliale, which means many mercies, or much mercy, is that the refrain on the psalm is, "For his mercy endures forever, Alleluia." And there are some wonderful settings of that, especially the Byzantine settings, that are almost responsory, where you can get the whole church singing along, and the music is very syncopated. So literally, the church rocks. In Greek monastic usage, they swing the chandeliers. They swing all the lamps. Everything is dancing. The lights are dancing. Everything is dancing, and the people are dancing practically. Of course, that's a little too radical for Russian taste, but which is a little more staid and sober. But the Ethiopians would have a great time with it. Then there's another thing that we do that's added to matins. Also for great saints and for feasts, it's called the magnification. We magnify thee, O Christ, giver of life, and we honor thy holy ascension. And then there's psalm verses that are sung following that. Is this key anybody's memory? And there's a great sensing of the church, and it's very festal. And Polyle, everybody, the clergy are all out in the center of the church, and the icon of the feast is in the center of the church, and it's this big, and very solemn and beautiful kind of celebration, specific to that saint or that feast. Then there's another element that for the great feasts, and that's the great doxology. In matins, there's always there are two forms of the doxology. For festal matins, which includes Sundays, because of the Feast of the Resurrection, it's always a great feast. Or for great saints, the great doxology is sung, with a nice melody. On daily usage, the great doxology is just read, and it has a different ending than when it's sung. On Sunday night when we sing Saturday night when we sing the great doxology, you remember what the ending is? It's the Trisagion. Holy God, holy mighty, holy immortal, have mercy on us. On weekdays, it just ends with a prayer. But the vigil service, remember, it's the two liturgical services out of the daily cycle. It contains all of the teaching material that the church has. The other services have very little teaching material specific to the various themes of the day. There's a Troparion. It mentions the theme, it mentions the name of the saint. They're very formulaic. So you don't really, there's very little teaching. And in the Divine Liturgy stays pretty much the same all the time, right? It doesn't really vary from week to week. And there's a reason for that, in that the Divine Liturgy is outside of time. And although it marks the particular feast with these thematic hymns, it really doesn't do a whole lot in explaining the feast or the saint or anything else. It's just the Divine Liturgy. And so, if you want to hear the church's teachings about the saints and the feasts, you got to go to the vigil, to Vespers and Matins. And so there's a vast amount of teaching material in the hymnography. Part of the fundamental ethos of the Orthodox tradition is that the services of the daily cycle of services contain an entire catechism. Everything you need to know about Orthodoxy you can get just from going to the services and listening. if you listen really attentively. And it's pretty comprehensive. My own experience is that literally taking some novices in, literally just off the street, essentially. No Sunday school, no previous exposure, even some of them to Orthodoxy. And you put them on the kleros, in other words, you put them at the chanter's stand where they help to sing the services and read. And after 1 year, they understand this whole thing inside out, because they've been immersed in it. And so it is, we're so used to learning visually that we don't often exercise we didn't in the past exercise our auditory learning. But if you attentively listen to the service, for example, if you stand there week after week after week after week, and you hear the whole Psalter read, you begin to really know it. And if you do that for a couple of years, you pretty much know the text. And you can tell if somebody makes a mistake, or if they leave out a word, or if they leave out a psalm, God forbid. And it really is. So it is also, you get to know the order of services, the psalms, the content of the psalms, because the psalms are the most important foundation of the service. They're the hymn book of the old temple, the first temple, and it's the hymn book of the church. Now, does this all make sense?
Liturgical, would you please repeat that? The Psalms are the most important...
They're the foundation of the services.
Foundation.
Now, there are some people who, lay people, who do as much as they can to keep this order in their own homes, which is pretty astounding, Or what they'll do is they'll read the hours when they go to work. They'll take a break at 9 o'clock, read the 3rd hour, take a break at noon, read the 6th hour, take a break at 3, read the 9th hour, maybe catch Vespers on their way home. One of the things that you certainly find in the old world and you don't find here is that part of the basic job of the parish priest is to have daily matins and vespers in his church. The parish church should have the daily cycle of services, at least matins and vespers. That's what a priest is supposed to be doing. In this country, for some reason, we don't do it. And there should be a daily liturgy. But that's where parishes were equipped with a full set of clergy, with several priests, several deacons, several professional chanters, subdeacons, prosperabakers, and the whole bit. All of those were offices that, for example, in Russia and in Byzantium, were paid positions within the church, so that people did them professionally. Now, a lot of places, priests aren't even paid, aren't even full time. So, I kind of skipped over Compline. There are two major forms of Compline. There's daily or small Compline, and then there's Great Compline. Great Compline is used during Great Lent and during certain certain feasts. For example, on Christmas and in Theophany, the vigil consists of Great Compline and Matins. Why? Because there's a Vesperal liturgy that's prescribed. Each one of the feasts of the Church has its own unique way of being celebrated. And the deeper you get into the liturgical life, the more you get to know and to look forward to the particular feasts of the Church. You get to know the hymnography. You get to know the melodies, and there are certain melodies that are connected with certain feasts. For example, there's a melody for that's used very frequently during Advent, during the Christmas fast, as marking the time before the Nativity and also before Theophany, and it's a wonderful it's a wonderful thing, and for me personally, it's really not Advent unless I'm hearing that melody in church. Unfortunately, a lot of places out here don't use it. The music is essential to the life of the Church. Now, one of the things I mentioned was the Octoikos, the book of the 8 tones. That's the weekly cycle. Each week is a whole set of services of texts that are interspersed into the text of the Horologion. So, and then that's combined also with the daily cycle with the saints. So, for example, remember in Vespers, you have this long set of psalms. Lord, I've cried unto thee, hearken unto me. Господи, возвах Тебя, услыши меня. Actually, what's supposed to be read is the entire psalm. It's actually 3 psalms, until you get to the number of stichira, or these hymns that are inserted into the verses of the psalms. So you get down, say, to the 6th verse from the end, and there'll be a stichira from the Octoikos, 6, 5, and 4. And then 3, 2, and 1 will be from the Manean. Then there's the glory verse. Then there's the now and ever verse. And these come from various sources. Well, unless you're putting the services together, it's probably not really. It's just too much information, too much detail to deal with where all of these various texts come from. Especially the now and ever verses. But it's part of this that gives the services their richness, because you have multiple themes being brought together. So, for example, Sunday was St. Artemis. Okay? St. Artemis, it was the, tone
4.
Tone 4 on Sunday. So you had the services for tone 4 sung in tone 4. The theme was the resurrection, the Sunday texts, combined with St. Artemis. And so on a Sunday, you would have 10 stichira, sung on Lord I Call. On on a typical weekday, it's 6. On a great feast, it's 8. That varies. But you would have these multiple themes stuck into the middle of the text, and the idea is that it's both the commemoration of the saint as well as the commemoration of the resurrection, as well as the commemoration of sunset and the beginning of the new day, and by implication, thus also the preparation for Sunday, the preparation for the liturgy on Sunday. The vigil service that we do on Saturday nights and before great feasts is an essential preparation for the Divine Liturgy. Partly because not only on the rational level, because it's got all of the teaching material. So on Sunday night you would hear all about the resurrection of Christ from in 7 different stichera. And then you would hear about St. Artemis in 3 different stichera. Then in the glory you would hear about St. Artemis a little more. And then in the now and ever you would hear about the resurrection. And it's structured like that thematically. So that what happens is that we're shaped by these services. We're shaped by these texts rolling over us again and again and again and again, throughout the years of our life and going to the service. That's, there's no possible way that your mind can seize on the number of themes and the number of ideas in the texts in any of these services, even the shortest, and much less the reading of the Psalter when you've got 2 or sometimes even 3 kathismas appointed. And that's 45 minutes worth of psalm reading, which usually goes at a pretty good clip. You can't grasp it rationally. But the idea is that each time you hear it, which is once a week, you you come to it as a slightly different person. All the things in your life are different. What happened that afternoon was different than what happened the afternoon a week ago or 2 years ago, or would happen in 5 years. When you'd still be at the same service, you'd be at the Vesper service on a Saturday night, but what happens is that your mind will seize on different aspects of what's being read. You have, for example, you have the 6 Psalms, which start out pretty dark. It's in the dark, and according to the tradition, these are the Psalms that Jesus said while he was dying on the cross. And whether that's the case or not, there's an awareness of suffering in and through those Psalms, and how to process it as a faithful person.
Would you say that again? I'm sorry.
There's in the 6 Psalms in particular, there's an awareness of suffering, and it becomes a kind of icon for us of how to deal with it, how to process it. Sometimes we just need to lament, and that's in the Psalms too. For example, So, for example, the third of the 6 Psalms, Psalm 62. My God, unto thee I rise early at dawn. My soul hath thirsted for thee. How often has my flesh longed after thee in a land barren and untrodden and unwatered. So in the sanctuary have I appeared before thee to see thy power and glory. For thy mercy is better than lives, my lips shall praise thee. So I will bless thee as long as I live. It's Thanksgiving. But then the psalm before it is close to an expression of despair. My heart is troubled, my strength hath failed me, and the light of my eyes, that even this is not with me. My friends and my neighbors drew nigh over against me and stood, and my nearest of kin stood afar off. They that sought after my soul used violence. They that sought after evils for me spake vain things, and craftiness all the day long did they meditate. But as for me, like a deaf man I heard them not, and was as a speechless man that openeth not his mouth. And I became as a man that hears not, and that hath in his mouth no reproofs.
Which psalm is that, Radhika?
That was 37. That's the second of the 6 Psalms. So I take all of the emotions that we feel as just as human beings are dealt with in the Psalter. Now, there's sometimes you don't want to pray for your, for example, sometimes it's when you're really feeling completely in despair. For filled with evils is my soul, and my life unto Hades is drawn nigh. I am counted with them that go down into the pit. I am become a man without help, free among the dead, like the bodies of them that slain that sleep in the grave, whom thou rememberest no more, for they are cut off from thy hand. They laid me in the lowest pit, in the darkness and in the shadow of death. Against me is thine anger made strong, and all thy billows hast thou brought upon me. Thou hast removed my friends afar from me, they have made me an abomination unto themselves. I have been delivered up and have not come forth. My eyes grow weak from poverty. It's pretty dark. But sometimes we feel like that.
Which one was that?
That psalm, that's the 4th of the 6 Psalms. That's number 87. The 6th Psalm, now this is the Hebrew rendering, not in your typical Protestant Bible. It's usually 1 or 2 off. The 6 Psalms consist of Psalm 3, Psalm 37, and 62. It's the first set. The second set is 87, 102, and 142.
87, what was that?
87, 102, and 142. Now, if you have a Jordanville prayer book, Matins is in there. The fixed parts of Matins is in there.
Jordanville prayer book?
Yeah.
So the one that I have, probably, no?
There are two very
The one that I
good.
got from the bookstore downstairs.
Yeah, hardcover.
Little red
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
That's it.
That'll have it.
Okay.
I see.
I have to leave. I apologize, but thank
No
you.
problem. So we'll wrap up in a couple minutes anyway. So next week, okay. So my hope for this week is that you kind of have an idea what's in the Horologion.
The what?
In this book, the Horologion, the
Oh,
daily
okay.
cycle of the services. We talked a little bit about each of the services and how some of it goes together. This is only the beginning. We're going to go into much greater detail later on.
Horologion in Greek means study of the hours? Or
Book of
something?
the hours.
Book of the hours.
Just a slow. Eventually, my hope, once we get through the daily cycle, is, and we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on this, or through these cycles and the feasts, and I'll kind of highlight feasts and their structure. But then we'll get into the text of the Divine Liturgy, the celebration of the liturgy, how it's structured, what it looks like, and what the actual prayers and movements of the liturgy are, so that you can enter more and more deeply in. But it's really important to understand and to go to the vigil services and vespers and matins when it's offered. And personally, one of the things that I found incredibly valuable was that when I was in seminary, I memorized most of the psalms of matins and vespers. And when I couldn't go to matins and vespers, I would recite them on my way to work. At least the psalms. And the six psalms in particular, are this incredible encapsulation of the spiritual life. So very valuable.
The six?
6 psalms.
Okay. Oh, the 6 psalms.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember. Sometimes I like the way you say things, and I try and get it exactly, and I forget. 6 psalms are an incredible encapsulation, you said,
of the spiritual life. They have something for when you're feeling in total despair, as well as when you have you're full of joy.
Could you tell me what the numbers on those are again? Oh, but this is in the prayer book.
Well, yeah, that's in the prayer. It's in the prayer. It's in the. Just look in matins in the prayer book.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, and you have the text.
So which of those does St. John's do regularly of all the lists of services? What is the
Do the
normal?
vigil, the hours.
Every single day, or
No, just on the eves of feasts,
okay.
and then Divine Liturgy in the morning, usually with the 3rd and 6th hour.
So there isn't like a daily thing that goes on. Oh.
Do you know if there's anything going on for Kazan tomorrow? Not necessarily a liturgy, but any kind of act.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
Okay, so is this clear as mud?
Crystal.
I think that would be an accurate yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Clear.
So everybody has a prayer book, right? Okay. Look in your prayer book and read through matins and vespers. So you can really understand how it's structured. The Jordanville prayer book has it, the Transfiguration Monastery prayer book has it, and the Old Believer prayer book has it.
You want the numbers for the psalms?
No, that's okay.
Is the Old Believer prayer book radically different otherwise, Laika?
No, but it has some very beautiful. Instead of 10 prayers before communion, it has 20. It's an old monastic, 17th century monastic prayer book.
Right.
Yeah.
Has it been translated into English?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, it's one side of the page is Slavonic, the other side is English.
That's not the one that you have in here in black, with the black cover, right? That would just be.
I don't know what's in there. So.
All Bibles.
Yeah. It's kind of long format. Okay. Very good. It is truly me to bless thee, O Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the Mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, more glorious beyond compare than the seraphim. Without corruption thou gavest birth to God the Word. True Theotokos, we magnify thee.
Исполняй